is your bridge to the land and people of Israel. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Israel Connect. And today I have with me a very special guest. I have with me author Sara Lamm. And Sara is a content editor for the IsraelBible.com and with Israel 365 Publications. She is originally from Virginia, and she made Aliyah to Israel with her husband and children in 2021. She has a master's degree in education from Bank Street College, and she taught preschool for almost a decade before making Aliyah to Israel. Sara is passionate about connecting Bible study with real life. She's the author of the recently published book, Into the Fire, Stories of Heroism from October the 7th. Sara, I have read your book, and I was deeply touched and inspired and moved by the stories that you wrote. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me, and also sharing these stories with the world through your platform. I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
So here's a very short description of the book. On October 7th of 2023, Israel faced its darkest day since the Holocaust. As terror rained from the skies and infiltrated peaceful communities across Israel, ordinary people were thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Into the Fire chronicles the heart-wrenching and inspiring stories of those who rose to meet this moment of unimaginable crisis. From the blood-soaked fields of the Nova Music Festival to the besieged kibbutzim of southern Israel to the extraordinary faith of average Israelis, you will be transported to the front lines of heroism and meet the first responders who rushed into danger, the survivors who demonstrated incredible resilience, and the everyday citizens who became heroes in the face of terror. Into the Fire is not just a retelling of events. It's a profound exploration of the human spirit's capacity for bravery, compassion, and resilience. This book will challenge you to examine your own potential for heroism. So, Sara, I'd like to ask you, what made you decide to write this book? Why did you write this book?
Sure. So I would say I think on October 7th and most importantly, October 8th, the day after, I think every single person following along, whether you were sitting in Israel or you're sitting halfway around the world, felt this feeling of helplessness. I know at least I did. And from speaking to my friends and my family, in those first very fuzzy days, we all weren't really sure what to do. Now, I know that physically living in Israel kind of had it has like an added layer of it, because in the middle of feeling this weird, like, how do we help our brothers and sisters? We're also hearing sirens constantly, and we're in the bomb shelter, and we're worried for our physical safety. But at the same time, we're watching this horror unfold in our country, in our hometown, and most importantly, with people who are innocent in the face of terror. And the thing that really helped bring us through those first few weeks, myself especially, was just reading about these stories that were starting to come out of this, I don't know, horror isn't even the right word, out of the atrocities. We started to read these stories of heroism. And it kind of, for me at least, I felt like I was able to be pulled through each horrific day as we were hearing about the hostages and the numbers and the terrible things that had happened, some of which I think we will still be learning about for years to come. And then there was this little glimmer of hope. You would open up Instagram, you would open up a news article, you would turn on the TV, and you would hear about this one random person, this 23-year-old, this 55-year-old person, excuse me, this, an older man just regular people who did these incredible things, many of whom tragically were killed, many of whom were not. But it sort of there was this light that was almost tangible that we were able to hold on to. And I think people around the world who, who are there supporting Israel and loving Israel also felt that as they started to hear about these people who really rose to the occasion. And I think people started to feel like they could even relate to the situation that was happening because they said, oh my gosh, I'm also that age, or I went to that school too, or I also have a dog, and this is how that person did this incredible thing, and maybe I could do an incredible thing as well. And over the subsequent months, I just kept learning more and more and more about all of these incredible people. And I felt particularly inspired when I looked through the Bible and I saw those same stories reflected in the text from the beginning of time. And then here they are happening in real life. And I felt like if I'm feeling so inspired by just a handful of stories, maybe I could bring some of those stories to life for other people. Unfortunately, many of the people who I wrote about in this book were killed. And so part of that was a feeling of maybe I could help continue their own narrative, give somebody else a glimmer of hope through these incredible stories of heroism. And that's kind of how it was born.
So, Sara, how did you do the research for these stories? What were your sources? How did you, especially to be able to tell the story of someone who heroically, tragically died in the saving of other lives? How did you gather your information? What were your sources?
Yeah. So I read everything I could. I really feel like I became best friends with every single person, although that's a very grand statement to say. If only I could meet some of these people who tragically were killed on October 7th and onwards. But I scoured the internet. I listened to every single podcast recording. If there was somebody who I had a connection with somehow, I would get as close as I could. Some of the stories, the sources are the people kind of dealing with the aftermath, it's still very sensitive. But if there was a way that I could get connected, I did. And I feel like now we're still learning more. Like I almost wish that there was a part two to some of these stories that I could write about, because even more information is coming out about some of these incredible people. But yeah, I feel like every night I went to bed thinking about somebody new.
So, will there be another book? I'm sure that there's many, many stories that have yet to be told of miracles that have happened on the battlefield, and the story and the saga continues. Do you think there might be a part two, another book that might come out that tells more of the stories of the miracles that the God of Israel is doing even now amongst his people? What do you think? I hope there's a part two.
I feel continuously inspired, just every day living here and reading about people who I didn't know about in the aftermath of October 7th and new heroes that have emerged. So there's definitely a chance. I think as we continue as unfortunately and fortunately, the story continues to unfold. Who knows?
Yes. So the stories are almost like sparks of light in the midst of a very dark, dark, dark day into the fire. So I have a few little snippets I'd like to quickly share, and then you can comment. One of the stories that really grabbed my heart, brought me to tears, and actually prompted me to action is the story of Hadas Lowenstern. And today she is a widow of 6 children. And here's a quote from her. This is from page 41 of the book. She says this, talking about his death, that is her husband, is secondary. He only died once. He lived every day. He literally grabbed every second And I am alive and my 6 kids are alive. And this is our plan. We plan on living a wonderful life. We will live. We will live in Eretz Yisrael and be a happy Jewish family. And this is the true victory. And so it says here on page 42, when the news of the death of her husband came to her, he was in the IDF, time seemed to slow as they delivered the words that would forever divide her life into before and after. Elisha, her beloved husband, and her partner, her children's father, was gone. The officers' voices faded into a muffled drone as the reality of their message crashed over her like a tidal wave. In that instant, Hadas felt as if she were standing on the edge of an abyss, teetering between the warmth of the life she knew and the cold, dark unknown that now stretched before her. And yet, even as she felt herself being torn apart by shock and grief, a steadfast part of her refused to be swept away. It was as if a switch had been flipped, activating a reserve of strength that she did not know that she possessed. And it goes on to say, page 45, this act of turning personal suffering into a force for good requires immense courage, selflessness, and a profound sense of purpose. Hadas's heroism lies not in denying her pain, but in choosing to channel it into a message that uplifts and strengthens others. And it's an attitude of gratitude that she has embraced. It's not a denial of her pain or loss, but a conscious choice to find balance in her life and to acknowledge both the sorrow and the joy. And so you want to add any more or say any more about that particular story that you wrote?
Yeah, actually, you had asked me before we began what one of my favorite stories or one of the stories that
Yes.
resonated with me. That was what I was thinking about, Hadas Lowenstern. And I actually just saw something, maybe this will be for the part two. I just saw they came out with a new mini series. It's in Hebrew, but it's kind of tracking her life now, almost a year after her husband's death. And it shows exactly what you were reading from that book, the balance of grief and horror and sorrow and pain with humor and life and gratitude and as you kind of introduced in the book, sparks of light.
Yes.
And this amazing little clip of her trying to figure out how to change a tire. She's
Yes.
a widow, she has 6 children, she's living life, she's shuffling her family from place to place. And I mean, I sometimes I feel like in the couple of hours that I'm alone with all of my children, I wonder, oh my gosh, how am I going to get to dinner time, let alone bedtime? And she's doing this daily without her partner ever again. And then there's this moment of lightness where she's like, how am I supposed to change a tire? Um, and it's kind of a dark humor, but I sometimes think that's what we need in a way to pull us through. And I think that she really just has embodied that sense of resilience that whether you've been through a personal tragedy or as we're all kind of living through this global tragedy, she's modeling for us just the way to do it. Like you have to say, I'm in pain. This is terrible. This hurts. And I can move through this. I'll be okay. We'll be okay.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Truly, the Jewish people are an extraordinary people. They are beloved and they are the apple of God's eye. And I love whom God loves, and He loves Israel and He loves the Jewish people. I'll put the link in the description box of where you can go to donate to widows of IDF soldiers. And when I read that story in the book, I was so deeply inspired and touched, it brought tears to my eyes, that I went to that page that Israel 365 has put together, and I made a donation to the widows of IDF, fallen IDF soldiers, because they're now going to be raising children for years to come as single moms. And this is one way that we can show love in a practical, tangible way to the widows that are left to raise those families, because their husbands made the ultimate sacrifice in defending the land and people of Israel. So another quick story I want to touch upon that really deeply touched me is the story of, let's see, his name is Aner Shapira. And he was a very creative and artistic kind of guy. He loved to do music. And everyone was kind of surprised when he joined the IDF. But then on that day, on October 7th, he raced to the battlefront to do what he could to help save and protect lives. And on page 76 in the book, he came across a group of people who were hiding in some kind of a safe room, and he went inside with them. But then Hamas, the terrorists, were throwing grenades into the room. And it was in this moment of crisis that Aner's true character shone through. Survivors recall that when Aner saw the panic in people's eyes, he immediately took charge and tried to calm everyone down. Guys, don't worry, he called out. I'm a soldier. My comrades are nearby. I'm here. Everything will be all right. And this instinctive move to reassure and lead others in a moment of extreme danger speaks volumes about his character. And as the sound of gunfire drew closer, Aner realized that the terrorists were about to throw grenades into the shelter. And at that moment, he made a decision that would save many lives and tragically cost him his own. Turning to his impromptu team, he said, I'm going to catch the grenades and throw them back. Watch me. If anything happens to me, take cover and continue what I am doing. That's amazing that he would catch the grenade and then throw it back at the terrorists. I mean, the courage, the boldness, I mean, to think quickly on your feet. And it goes on to say he caught one after another. And I think sadly, the eighth one that he caught blew up in his hand. But he saved lives. Wow. Would you like to comment on that particular story?
Yeah, I guess, something that I really tried to focus in on when I was thinking about Aner Shapira and what he did was the fact that he was 22. He was a 22-year-old boy. He had his whole life ahead of him. And I want to say that he is the only 22-year-old boy in all of Israel who could do something like that. But when I read his story, I thought about all of the soldiers who are currently fighting in Gaza, who are currently fighting in Lebanon, who are currently protecting the Jewish people and the people of the world, because only God knows how what we're up against at this moment, and what the Western world is up against, although not everybody knows that. And he's this 22-year-old boy who loves music and loves his friends and is sitting there making a decision that will ultimately, he knows he's not going to make it out alive, and he's catching these grenades and he's saving these strangers around him. And I think that just embodies the incredible sense of purpose that young people, especially in Israel, have, that I hope my own children will grow up having. And I think that it's that dignity, it's that appreciation for human life, and it's that willingness to do whatever you need to do to save your country, to save the people around you, and to save morals and values in the face of true evil. That's what he was doing. He was throwing it right back at them and saying, no way, I'm not going to let you win. That's what I imagine if I were to ask him. And we'll never get to really know what was going on in his mind in those moments. But I'm almost filled with a sense of pride when I read his story and when I read stories similar to his, just in terms of how incredibly strong the youth here are. And that's something that really, really touched me.
Yes. The last story I want to touch upon is from chapter 10, Heroic Voices of Hope, three sets of parents and their hope in the face of tragedy. And this one
Mhm.
deeply touched my heart, the story of Iris Haim, all about a mother's forgiveness. So on December 15th, Iris Haim received news that can only be described as a parent's worst nightmare. Her son, Yotam, who had been held hostage by Hamas for over 2 months, was accidentally killed by IDF soldiers as he attempted to escape captivity. And yet, amid her grief, Iris's response was not anger or blame, but profound empathy and forgiveness. I can only imagine the sorrow and the grief and the heaviness that must have descended upon the IDF members that were there when this accidental killing happened. And so when she heard that the IDF had been, such a heartbreaking mistake, and that they reacted with, a heavy heart, and that some were, harshly criticizing the IDF, this mother spoke up. And from page 134, she says, "I am Yotam's mother. I wanted to tell you, the IDF, that I love you very much and hug you here from afar. I know that everything that happened is absolutely not your fault and nobody's fault except that of Hamas. May their name be wiped out and their memory erased from the earth." And she went on to say, "I want you to look after yourselves and to think all the time that you are doing the best thing in the world. Nobody is going to judge you or be angry. Not me and not my husband, Raviv, not my daughter, Noya, and not Yotam. May his memory be blessed. And not Tubal, Yotam's brother. We love you very much. And that is all." Wow, what a remarkable message of forgiveness and love. Your comments on this particular story?
Yeah, I mean, I remember the evening that we got that news. It was Saturday night, right after the Sabbath, after Shabbat had ended. We turned on our phones. We hadn't had them on for 25 hours, and we saw this news. They found hostages, but there was a tragedy. They had killed them by accident, and it was it was so painful to read. And our first thoughts were, oh my gosh, those poor parents, these people who have been holding out hope that their children were alive. And it was so complicated. And then we saw what Yotam's mother, what Iris was saying. And there was just no other way to see it except for through her lens of forgiveness and grief, but ultimately love. I think that I'm sure it's an incredibly nuanced, she must experience a lot of nuanced feelings, on her day to day. It's terribly sad what happened and terribly tragic, but I think that the way that she expressed herself, especially to his fellow soldiers, who again, we're talking about all of these 21-year-old, 22-year-old guys who are fighting in Gaza, for them to have this horrible thing happen on their watch, and for her to say, it's okay. You keep doing what you're doing. You're doing the right thing. It's going to be okay. And I can't imagine how empowering and strengthening that must have felt for all of those soldiers, and for us, watching by, just the same. It's tragic things happen in the fog of war, and here's this mother who is saying, you got to keep fighting. You're fighting for what's right. Don't give up. Don't stop, no matter what. It's really an incredible message.
Yes. So, Sarah, the application for the book for each and every one of us that we take the time to read this amazing, remarkable book is, would I rise to the occasion if I found myself in a similar situation? Or if you're raising children, how can I raise my children so that they have this kind of a heart that will, greater love has no man than this, that he lays down his life for his brother, that people who are just ordinary citizens would run into the fire to rescue and to save others at their own peril. What are your thoughts or comments about how can each and every one of us find that spark of life and love within us to do something similar, that that we would help others who are in great danger? What are your thoughts?
You know, I think that I think that it's hard sometimes to imagine like the worst case scenario happening and what would we do. It's very scary in some ways to think about what these people went through and then to picture ourselves in that exact position. Although I believe we all hope that we would rise to that occasion and go into the fire if need be in our own way. But as a mother of young children, something that I've really, really been thinking about a lot this year is just in the moment how to model empathy and compassion and forgiveness and humor, these things that we see in all of these heroic stories on a day-to-day basis with my own kids. Whether it's, oh, you hear that child crying at the park? I hope they're okay. They must have fallen. That must have hurt. What can we do to help somebody who's fallen feel better? Whether it's just modeling those little tiny, tiny, minuscule interactions or, being intentional about the conversations that I'm having around my children, maybe not even directly to them if I say, oh, I just learned about another chayal, another soldier, someone who got injured and all of these people came to help them, or that soldier um was saving other people's lives and he did these incredible things and nobody asked him to, but he felt that it was right in his heart. Just having those conversations, at least for me in this phase of life, when I could speak about, elementary school aged and preschool children, but I think on a grown-up level as well, we just have to take each day and say, what opportunities do I have in front of me to be kind to someone else, to put myself in their shoes, to imagine that they're my own brother, my own sister, my own spouse, and how can I be a good person to them? And I don't think it needs to extend to jumping into a proverbial fire at that moment. I hope that none of us ever have to do that. But I think that if we start conditioning ourselves to just have that element of empathy,
Yes.
we'll all be able to rise to the occasion. I really hope
Yes.
so.
I also think that the extraordinary character that I see, not just in one or two stories, it's a unique thing, but it's across the board. It's many, many, many people who have
Mm.
the courage and the compassion to jump into the fire. It's connected to the fact that a lot of them follow the God of the Bible, the God,
Yeah.
the Judeo-Christian ethic of the God of Israel and the ethics that you draw and you pull from the Bible that impacts the way you walk and your character. And so for that, we're very, very thankful for the Jewish people who gave us the Bible. We'll be forever indebted to the Jewish people for the Bible that was given to us through them. So I just want to really strongly encourage our listeners and viewers, get this book, Into the Fire. You can go to Israel365store.com, and it's right there on the main page. That's the Israel365store.com. Get this book. It'll make a great holiday gift. Buy 2, buy 3, buy 5 of them. It's an awesome book. Sara, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for telling these stories to the world, and may it bring forth many sparks of light and love when darkness comes into our world. Thank you so much, Sara.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such an honor and a privilege to chat with you, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you more. And to everyone who's listening and everyone who will hopefully buy this book, my prayer and my hope is that at the end of the day, through reading these stories, you're able to honor and bring light to these incredible people, and also know that you have potential to be your own hero in your own story as well. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.